Why is it that women don't report abuse? And what is it that's happening in a couple relationship or an intimate partner relationship? And I want to acknowledge that harm can happen in same-sex relationships, mixed gender relationships, relationships of every sexual orientation. Why doesn't the person who's harmed, and in Canada the statistics are predominantly women who are targeted by intimate partner violence, why don't they report? Again, this is a complex issue that speaks to the larger messages that are given to people in the wider community about stigma and shame, that if you report violence, it means that you've experienced violence. If you've experienced violence, then there is a chance that in the wider community you will somehow be blamed for that, that somehow you will be held responsible for the harm somebody else has committed against you. And historically, that is a common response in the community. I think that's often because people have, to some degree, borne witness in some way or stood by in some way while harm happened. Maybe they didn't know about it. Maybe they did know about it. Maybe they knew a little bit about it and didn't really have the language to know what was going on. So later, when the harm became exposed, I think some people experience a lot of embarrassment and they don't want to admit that they could have done something to stop the harm. A big part of it can be that the person who's experiencing harm still feels very strong emotional connection to the person who's harming them. The person who's experiencing harm and violence is often also the one person who sees the most vulnerable aspects of the person committing harm. So they may hold out an incredible amount of hope for the best in the other person to come forward. So once the harm has ended, there may be an increased tenderness, but there may also be windows of vulnerability into the person who's caused harm and a deep desire to draw out the best in that person. The other reason that I think often people who experience harm in intimate relationships don't come forward is that we have, at a wider cultural level and societal level, a lot of language around, in addition to this language of stigma and shame, there's a language of victimization. And there's shame associated with being a victim, that somehow you weren't strong enough, that somehow that you couldn't cope with what was going on. When we recognize those moments of resilience and resistance in people who are living with intimate partner violence, we bear witness to something that nobody else is witnessing, and it helps that person to bear witness to their own strength and their own resilience and their own resistance. So often people are tempted to say, well, you should leave, get out of the situation, not realizing that that simply compounds the shame of the person who chooses to stay for very complex reasons. They may be economic reasons. I believe they often are. They may be reasons that have to do with faith and religion, beliefs around the sanctity of marriage, and that that should not be broken at any cost. There may be children. One of the reasons that people hesitate to leave violent relationships is because they're very afraid of what will happen afterwards. The Canadian Red Cross tells us that the risk of life-threatening violence is highest in an intimate relationship immediately after the partner who's experienced harm leaves. So if that's often the woman, when the woman leaves the relationship, the 6 months to a year afterwards are actually the period of highest risk. They can also be the period where that person is most isolated and alienated. It may be over the course of that violent relationship that that person has either been physically or emotionally removed and cut off from many of their supports if we happen to be one of the few people who is in contact with somebody and we know that person is in a violent relationship, maintaining that contact and support in an unconditional way is very, very important, so that that person can count on that support when they do eventually choose to leave. Often women attempt to leave many times before they successfully make an exit.